She believed her husband had written every word. Even after he was gone, she believed that. And in a way, he had started it. But there had been someone else finishing what he began, showing up in the margins of her grief, loving her in a silence so careful she almost mistook it for absence. His name was Kwon. And the story of how she found her way back to living begins the way those stories always do, not with bravery, but with a folded note tucked beneath a coffee mug left out the night before. Elijah had known for 13 months. He told Amara the evening of the diagnosis, sitting across from her at the dining table with the composure of a man who had done all of his unraveling in the hospital elevator and arrived home prepared to be steady. That was Elijah. He processed his pain somewhere private and showed up to the world already put back together. Amara had spent 8 years learning to love that about him and learning to reach beneath it, past the calm exterior to the man who sometimes cried quietly in the shower and thought she couldn't hear. She loved the version the world saw and the version that belonged only to her. She loved them the same, he told Kwon 5 weeks after the diagnosis. They had known each other since their mid-20s, 2 men who had met at a firm in the city and built a friendship on the kind of foundation that didn't require tending because it was structural, load-bearing. When Kwon got the call, he drove 2.5 hours without stopping. He sat at the table and listened to Elijah explain the prognosis, the options, the timeline. He didn't cry while Elijah was talking. Elijah would have found that unbearable. He cried in the parking garage before he pulled out, sitting in his car with the engine off for a long time, his forehead resting on the steering wheel. It wasn't the first time Elijah had needled Kwon about his personal life. He'd been doing it for years, offhandedly, the way he raised topics that genuinely mattered to him, as though they had simply drifted into the conversation on their own and hadn't been waiting there on purpose. "You're going to be 40 in 2 years, he'd said once, sitting across from each other at a restaurant after a long week. "When are you going to let someone in?" Kwon had smiled at his water glass. "I let people in. You let people visit, there's a difference." "Elijah, I'm serious, you have a good life and you're keeping it to yourself and that seems like a waste." Kwon had looked at him sideways. "You've been married too long. You've forgotten what it's like out there." "I've been married 8 years, and it's the best decision I've ever made and I would make it again in a flat second." Elijah had said it without drama, the way you state something you have long stopped needing to examine. "I want that for you. You're one of the best men I know and I want someone to actually know that," Kwon had said quietly. "When I find something like what you and Amara have, I'll know it's worth stepping into. I'm not settling for less." Elijah had gone quiet for a moment. Something passed across his face, brief and unreadable. Then he nodded slowly with a weight to it, the way a man confirms something he'd already privately decided. Kwon turned that nod over in his mind many times in the years that followed. It was 10 weeks before the end when Elijah asked him. They were sitting in the living room in the early evening, the light doing something amber and unhurried through the curtains. Elijah had a glass of water he kept forgetting. Kwon had a cup of tea gone cold. "There's something I need you to do for me," Elijah said without preamble. "Whatever it is," Kwon said. Elijah reached into the side pocket of his chair and pulled out an envelope, sealed and thick with pages. He had been writing for 3 weeks, it turned out. Not long letters, small ones, each written for a specific day he knew would be hard for Amara in ways that would not always be obvious from the outside. The first time she had to renew her car registration alone. The morning after the first time she slept through the night without waking. Her birthday, the anniversary, the day she'd have to file their taxes as a single person for the first time. "Leave them where she'll find them," Elijah said. "She keeps her reading glasses on the kitchen counter every night. She always sets her mug out before bed. She leaves the book she's reading face down on the coffee table." Kwon looked at the envelope. "How many did you write?" Elijah's expression softened at the edges. "Enough to get her through the first year." Kwon drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat and did not open it because it was not for him to open. He placed it in the drawer of his nightstand and thought about it every single day in the months that followed. When Elijah died on a Thursday morning in October, with Amara holding one hand and Kwon holding the other, the envelope was the first thing Kwon thought about when he walked into his apartment that night. He had a job. He was going to do it right. The first note appeared on a Monday. Tucked under her mug, the one she always set out on the counter the night before because she had learned that mornings were survivable only if she made small decisions for herself at midnight. A folded square of paper, no envelope. Elijah's handwriting. Her hands were shaking before she had finished the first sentence. "Good morning, Amara. Your vitamins are next to the sink. You skip them when you're rushing and you're always rushing. There's fruit in the bowl and that bread you like in the cabinet. I love you more than today is going to feel like. Let it be true anyway." She stood at the counter until the mug went cold. Then she sat on the kitchen floor and wept in a way she hadn't let herself weep since the funeral, open and without restraint, without performing survival for anyone watching. Then she took her vitamins. Then she ate the bread. Then she got dressed and went. Kwon was methodical about it in the way Elijah would have recognized. He kept a physical calendar marked with small penciled circles. He drove to her building the evening before each marked date, used the spare key Elijah had pressed into his hand in the final month, placed each note exactly where Elijah had specified, and left without making a sound. She never knew he had been there. He moved in and out of her life like something the season sent. In those first months, it was entirely an act of devotion to Elijah. Kwon missed him with the particular ache of men who were not given quite enough vocabulary for grief, a low and constant pressure, the reflex of picking up his phone to send Elijah something small and then remembering. Placing the notes gave his grief a place to go, a function, something it could do, then it shifted, not suddenly. The way the light shifts in a room you've been sitting in for hours, slowly enough that you can't name the exact moment it changed. He began to wonder, on the days between visits, whether she had slept, whether she had eaten anything real, whether the particular Wednesday ahead of her was one Elijah had written for or one she'd have to navigate entirely alone. It grew the way things grow when you tend them without admitting you're tending them. There were mornings he woke before his alarm, and she was already in his mind, not with urgency, not with heat, but with a kind of quiet steadiness, the way you think about something you are afraid to stop having. He would lie in the gray before sunrise in his apartment and think, Amara has a work call today that she's been dreading. Amara said at dinner last week that she's been having trouble eating. Amara laughed at something her niece said on Sunday, and it was the first time in months that the laugh reached her eyes. He kept a careful internal record of her. The way you keep track of things you are not ready to name losing, he knew what it was. Kwon was not a man who deceived himself about things that mattered. He understood precisely what it was, and he also understood that it was not something he had any right to, possibly ever, and that the most honest thing he could do with it was keep it folded quietly inside him and continue showing up the way Elijah had asked, without need, without agenda, without allowing any of the feeling that lived underneath everything to surface into something that would change what he was doing. He made his peace with that, or practiced making his peace with it. There were evenings he almost managed it. He watched her at the family gatherings. He watched her be warm and composed and slowly, carefully disappearing into the work of appearing fine. He noticed the weight she lost in the second and third months. He noticed the way the steadiness she showed everyone else cost her something. He paid attention the way someone pays attention when they know the full picture and the people being reassured do not. Elijah's notes ran out in month 10. What no one knew, not Amara, not Elijah's family, not anyone, was that Kwon had made a separate arrangement entirely, one he had never been asked to make and had not told a single person about. A month after the funeral, he had contacted her building manager and quietly covered 4 months of rent that had fallen behind. He had called the mechanic she used and put his card on file with standing instructions to bill him for anything she brought in. He had spoken to the concierge at her building about the grocery delivery account she had been using and ensured there was always a balance sitting on it. Not extravagantly, nothing that would announce itself or require explanation, just enough to make the world hold still while she found her footing. He did not do it to be good. He did it because the alternative, the image of her alone in that apartment managing a rent dispute or sitting in a waiting room at the mechanics on top of the weight she was already carrying, was something he could not allow himself to accept. Elijah had asked him to deliver notes. Kwon had decided, quietly and without ceremony, that notes were not going to be sufficient. He never told her. He never planned to. It was not a gift that required being known. It was simply what you did when someone mattered to you past the point of language, and the only thing left was action. He stood in his kitchen on a Sunday evening holding the empty envelope and understood, with a certainty that felt almost physical, that he was not finished. There were still 2 months of circled dates in his notebook. And Amara was still not all right. He sat down. He got out a piece of paper. He didn't attempt to write like Elijah. He knew he couldn't, and he respected both of them too much to try. He wrote in his own voice, which was careful and plain and slightly stilted in the way of someone who means everything precisely and is still working out how to say it. Amara, it's the 9th. I know this week is sitting heavy on you. I don't have a way to fix that, and I won't pretend I do. But you haven't worn your good coat in 3 weeks, and it's getting cold. Please wear it today. She wore the coat. He had stayed that morning. That was the part he had not planned for. He always left before she was awake, in and out like a habit. But something had made him pull over 2 blocks from her building, and he had told himself it was responsible, that Elijah would have done the same, that he simply wanted to make sure she was all right. He watched from the car as she came out 40 minutes later. Coat buttoned, shoulders back, scarf tucked in. Alive and warm because he had said please. And something about that, the specific smallness of it, cracked something open in him that he had been keeping very carefully sealed. He sat with both hands on the wheel and said it out loud to himself, the way you speak to something that has already stopped listening. This is not yours. She's not yours. You are doing this for Elijah. He drove home. He spent the rest of the day not thinking about the way she'd looked walking to her car, upright, warm, present. He failed at this completely and without grace. He hadn't expected to look forward to it. That was the thing that blindsided him, not the guilt of writing in Elijah's place, which he had anticipated and steeled himself for, but the quiet, private pleasure of paying close enough attention to one person to know what they needed on a specific day. He noticed things at dinners that he filed carefully for later. The way she held her jaw when she was more tired than she was admitting. The authors she mentioned. The small things she'd accomplished that she reported with careful restraint, as though celebrating too openly might cause them to be taken from her. He wrote her a note on her birthday that contained nothing about Elijah at all. Just her, happy birthday, Amara. You have come through a year that would have finished most people. You didn't finish. I'm not sure you understand how uncommon that is. I hope today is soft with you, she posted in the family group that evening. Today was actually okay. I didn't expect that, but it was. Kwon read it twice and set his phone down and told himself what he was feeling was simply the satisfaction of a promise kept. He told himself Elijah would have been glad. He told himself a long list of things in those months that were partly true, the part of the truth you hold on to when the rest of it is still too large to carry. The last date in his notebook was the 1st anniversary of Elijah's death. Kwon sat with it for nearly 3 weeks before he wrote anything. He began 4 different notes and threw them all away. He didn't know how to hold this one, didn't know what she needed, didn't know what he could honestly give her that wasn't too much, or that didn't carry the weight of something he still hadn't let himself name. In the end, he wrote the only thing he knew to be completely true. He loved you in a way I have spent years watching and never once stopped marveling at. You were worth every bit of it. You still are. Kwon. He signed his name for the first time. He placed it beneath her mug. He drove home and sat in his own parking spot for a long time with the engine off before he went inside. She found it in the morning. She read it once, and then again, and then she held it flat against her chest with her eyes closed and the light coming steady through the kitchen window, and she felt something she had not felt in a year. Not happiness exactly. Not quite yet. But the first honest signal that happiness was still somewhere on the map of her future. A door she hadn't been certain was still there, open, just slightly, just enough. She didn't know it was Kwon who had written the later months. She believed it was the last provision from a man who had loved her with such deliberate care that he had arranged her survival from the other side of it. She didn't notice that the handwriting had quietly changed, that the voice had shifted, become a little less certain, a little more present tense, a little more like someone in the middle of learning her rather than someone who had always known. She didn't need to know. Not yet. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in late March, 7 weeks after the anniversary, in her kitchen, over nothing at all. She had been reaching past him for something on a high shelf and lost her balance, just slightly, just a stumble, one hand catching the counter. A small thing. The kind of thing that's over before it's begun. But she made a sound, half laugh, half surprise, and when she turned to steady herself, Kwon was already there. He caught her elbow. And the expression on his face was so entirely disproportionate to what had just happened, so stripped of the careful composure he always wore in her presence, so openly frightened and so openly something else that she stopped thinking about the shelf entirely. She let him check that she was steady. She let the moment sit. And then, when he was still holding her arm and not yet finding a reason to let go, she said quietly, "The handwriting was close. You were careful, but the voice was different. A little less like someone who already knew me, a little more like someone still in the process of it." She paused. "And I saw your car 2 blocks down the morning you asked me to wear the coat. I didn't say anything because I hadn't decided what to do with it yet." She looked at him steadily. "I wore the coat because you were sitting out there in the cold worrying about me, and it was the only way I had to let you know I saw you." Kwon was very still. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Long enough," she said, "to understand that what you've been doing, the notes, the car, everything else, you stopped doing it just for Elijah somewhere along the way." He exhaled, and with it went something he had been carrying for a very long time. "It wasn't supposed to become what it became," he said. "I need you to know that. It started as something I owed him. And then somewhere in the middle of it, you—" He stopped, tried again. "You are the first thing in my mind every morning, Amara. Not urgently. Just certainly. I don't know exactly when that became true, but I'm not interested in going back to before it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "He told you, didn't he, that you needed to find a love like his before you'd know you were ready?" Kwon looked at her. "He told you that?" "He told me the night before he died," she said. Her voice was very quiet and very full. "He told me that if it ever came to anything between the two of you, if you were willing and I was ever ready, he had no objections from wherever he ended up." Kwon couldn't find words. She said softly, "He knew you, probably better than you knew yourself. I think he knew before you did." She raised her hand and placed her palm against his face, unhurried, warm, the specific gravity of a decision made clearly and without any fear at all. "I'm not in a rush," she said. "I'm done pretending I don't know what's been happening." Kwon turned his face slightly into her hand, the way people do when they have run out of language, and stayed there. Outside, the light moved slow and unhurried across the kitchen floor. Somewhere in the apartment, a clock kept its count. And in the quiet between two people who had arrived at each other through loss and letters and a coat worn on a cold morning, something new, something patient and entirely real, had just begun. They were not in a hurry. That was the thing that made it real. They moved slowly, the way people move when they have learned what losing costs and are no longer willing to be careless with anything good. There were months of dinners before anything more. Months of long phone calls and slow Sunday afternoons, and the particular closeness of two people who already knew the worst of each other's grief and had stayed anyway. She understood that the man she had loved her so completely and so deliberately that he had arranged her survival from beyond it. She wasn't wrong. Elijah had started it. Elijah had made it possible. But it was Kwon who had learned, somewhere in the long middle of it, that love is not only the feeling. It is what you do when the feeling has no witness, no reward, and you do it anyway every time without being asked. There is a voicemail still saved in her phone, recorded the week before Elijah died. She has never played it. She doesn't need to. She hears everything it would say every time Kwon looks at her the way he looks at her. She kept Elijah's photograph on the shelf in the living room. Kwon never once suggested she move it. He was the one. At a dinner the following winter with friends who had known Elijah, who told the story of the two of them getting completely lost on a road trip in 2018 and ending up at the wrong city entirely, and told it so well that the table was breathless with laughter and Amara had to set down her glass. She looked at him across the candlelight with an expression that held love and gratitude, and something beneath both that had no single name but felt, completely and at last, like wholeness. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and tell me in the comments what you think about it. Was it worth it?